Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Power Platform User Group webinar Christmas edition. My name is Clavin. I'm a Microsoft MVP. With me, I have a special guest, Nived, who is going to teach us about Power Automate work queues. Nived, over to you.
Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to this Christmas webinar. So today in this webinar we'll be discussing about work queues, which is a feature in Power Automate which has been released last year. So before wasting time, so let's directly go to next slide. So before starting with the topic, let me introduce myself. I am Nived and I'm an RPA developer with having 4 years of industrial experience. Also I'm a Power Platform super user 3 times. Also I do explore other RPA tools as well, which includes UiPath, Power Automate and some other open source RPA tools as well. Apart from RPA technology, I do explore some other technologies as well, like machine learning, blockchain, which seems to be quite interesting to me. And also I do create technical content through this following platform. Like I have a website where I do write blogs, and also I have a YouTube channel where I do post content around RPA. And also if you want to connect with me, please connect with me on my LinkedIn. I have pasted the link here. So without wasting time, next move to the next slide. And also I just want to thank Nived N for sponsoring this particular webinar. So let's start with the topic of work queues. So before starting with the topic, let's go to the agenda, like what we are going to discuss as part of this webinar. So first we'll be discussing about what is work queues. Okay, we'll understand what is work queues. Next we will see a work queues demo, like where I will showcase how work queues work with a example of a use case. And next we'll discuss about what is the advantage of using work queues. Next I will do a comparison between work queues, SharePoint and Excel, like what benefit work queue provide, or what benefit SharePoint provide, or what benefit Excel provides the in terms of the job that work queue is designed to do. And next at last we'll be discussing about work queues backend, which is actually the dataverse concept of these work queues. So let's start with our first topic, that is understanding work queues. So what actually is work queue? So if I discuss about work queues, work queue actually helps to store process related data, which actually helps to automate the complex processes. So it's like a container where it stores different data, and it actually helps to automate the most complex process. The process we see as a complex, it actually helps to break it down to simpler ones so that it can be automated very easier. So if I take an example of an invoice entry, for example, you have an Excel file where you have to do an invoice entry into some application. Maybe you can consider it as a desktop application. So on a normal RPA basis, maybe you will create a flow which will actually loop through each of the Excel row, enters the details to the right. But work queue also helps to achieve the same thing, but there's something better, I would say. If there is something better which actually work queue can give you when you utilize work queue for these kind of operations. So we will see that later, like when we discuss about the advantages, you will understand like what benefit actually this work queue provide in comparison with the normal Excel operations. So we'll see that later. And each data stored is considered as a work queue item. So I told you work queue is a kind of a container where it stores the process related data, and each item that is stored actually is used for a used for processing. So if I talk about the same example, invoice entry, so here we have an Excel which have like the 10 rows of invoice data, which where each rows of data need to be entered into the invoice application. So each row of data can be stored as a single item in the work queue, and that single item which need to be processed, that's called work queue item. I would say it's a unit of work queue. It's a unit of work queue actually, and we'll see more about that later. And next, another advantage of having work queue is it actually helps to prioritize the data to be processed. So that is one advantage I would say with work queues. Like if you have some records which you need to process quite earlier due to its deadlines and all, you can utilize those features actually here. this there is a priority feature which actually helps to prioritize those work queues. Let's say whether these work queue items need to be processed very faster, whether these work queue item need to be processed very maybe it's not urgent to process it now, so we can put it as a normal priority or a low priority. So these are the kind of so work queue actually helps to we can set the priority for each of the work queue item independently, and there are many advantages or many applications associated with that as well. And now I just want to discuss about the prerequisites of work queues. These are some technical content that you have to just remember. Like for using work queues, you need to have a Power Automate premium license. So it's a premium feature. So if you have the Power Automate premium license, you can use this work queue feature in your Power Automate. And next, it requires the environment maker role or some other roles which is related to Dataverse, because at the beginning I told you that this work queue backend is completely dependent on Dataverse, which we will going to explore further in the later slides. And next, some URL configuration, because for the public and government clouds this URL and IP address configuration will comes into place. So these things we have to consider there, and you can find the details more around in the Microsoft documentation of the work queues. So now let me go ahead and explain you about this work queue by explaining them in the Power Automate portal by navigating to the Power Automate portal. So let me go to Power Automate portal. Okay, so so this is the Power Automate portal, and here I have already selected the work queue here. So you can, if you don't find the work queue under this list, you can click on more, and you can discover all, and under that you can find this work queue feature. You can pin it here as per your requirement. And to create a work queue, what you have to do is you have to go to this work queue, and then you can click on new, and then you can provide the work queue name, like okay, I need to provide the name as ABC or something like that, and you can provide the description, work queue key. If you want to provide a work queue key, it's not important because it's optional. If you provide it, okay. If you don't provide it, it will generate some GUID, I would say, after it is created. And set default item expiration. What does it actually meant here is, so we can set a expiration date for each work queue item. For example, I want to set my work queue item and that it should expire after 1 day after it has been uploaded to the queue. For example, I uploaded I have an invoice entry system, as I already told you. So for example, this invoice entry system should be done every day, and it shouldn't be the invoice entry that is designed for this day should not be done next day. So at that point we can set an expiration date. Okay, this work queue item should be expired after 1 day, so that when the next scheduled run happens, it shouldn't pick up those queue items for processing. So you can set a default level item expiration. And one more thing you have to understand here is this expiration date you can set for every queue item. So if you don't have a if you have already set a default item expiration at the work queue level, it would be applied to all the work queues which has been created under this particular work queue. And if you don't set it, fine, you can even set it at the work queue item level also. And just remember that if you set the work queue expiration date at the work queue item level, that will be considered rather than this default item expiration. And also you can select the schema type. You can you can design, okay, you can decide, okay, whatever work queue item which is getting uploaded to my queue should have a specific format, should have a particular JSON schema. Similarly, it should have a particular XML structure. So you can decide that based on this. If you select JSON, you can add a schema here, or if you keep it as none, you can add any input format of data, because mostly the preferred format of data to be entered in the work queue item is JSON. We do prefer JSON. Sometimes we do prefer XML also. Sometimes we can directly write a plain text as well. It's completely free, or it actually gives us that freedom. And next is auto retry on IT exception. So certain scenarios, this is one advantage of having a work queue. For example, assume that your invoice entry got failed due to your application is not responding. So what you can do here is you can retry it, right? As a human, we do a retry. Maybe we'll run maybe we have to take that particular Excel row and we have to retry it. Same thing, this feature actually does the same. So whenever any work queue item failed due to some exception, IT exception. We consider it as IT exception, like due to network issues, due to some unknown failures, it fails. This feature actually gives a chance to retry, and by enabling this feature, you can specify how many times you want to retry it. It will retry it continuously until this maximum limit. Okay, and this feature you can even override, or you can even configure it while at the flow level as well, which we will see. So that is something about I want to discuss about the when you create a work queue. And now let me show you one of the work queue which I have created, for example. So let me show this contours of automation. So if I click this one, if I click on edit, you see I have all the information, and you see this value I didn't populated it here. It was automatically populated when the queue was created, and I have an auto retry on IT exception. I don't have any schema because I don't want any schema to be used here for my automation, but certain scenarios we require schema as well, which actually prevents any specific format should be used for the work queues. And also you can even change the work queue status, like whether you want this work queue item not to be used. You can put it as stopped or paused. Okay, like prevent it from usage, I would say. And manage access. So manage access means you can provide access. Okay, I want to give the access to some other persons, so at that point you can provide the access here. So normally there is only co-owner role. So if you type the name of the person, you will get to find that okay, I can only provide the co-owner role only here. Okay, and this is something I just want to discuss about the overview level. So let me go into the work queue to show you about the details. So here if you see under contours automation, you can see under overview you will able to find lot of details, like about average handling time. You can get a graph, right, how many items has been processed, and you will find the details like which solution it is present. So one thing you have to remember is when you create a work queue, normally it is stored in the default solution unless you reference it with some other solutions. Okay, that thing you have to remember, because it is a part of the database, and you can see whom it is shared with, and you can also find how many work queue items has been processed, how many got exemption, and you can find a lot of details like according to the status, how many items has been processed successfully, how many got failed, everything you can find here. And what is the average processing time of each queue item? It just calculate the average processing time of each queue item. We give an average value like 18 seconds it is taking. So these kind of graphs we can easily obtain from here, which actually gives a picture that okay, how our work queue is performing. Something a good feature, I would say. And now let me go to these items. So under items you will find lot of queue items which has been processed. So here I have around 40 queue items, if I remember. I don't remember how many queue items I have here. So you can see here there are many queue items. So I told you each unit of work queue is actually the work queue item. So work queue item contains the data which needs to be processed. So if I talk about the invoice entry, sometime back I have talked, right? So each row of invoice data which needs to be entered is considered as a work queue item there, right? So similarly here I need to enter some data into some contours application that we will see later. So here each entry, each work queue item represents each entry to the to that particular application. And you see here, if I just let's say you can even create a work queue item from here directly, but we never recommend it because we do it through flows and all. But I just show you how a work queue item can be created from the work queues portal. So you see, you can give a name to the work queue, you can provide a status, like I just give a name as data status. So status actually represent like it is a kind of a category by which we can understand that okay, this work queue item is in processing state, or it is being processed successfully by the bot, or it get failed due to some issues and all. So that we will see later. I will just explain later after that. And next is priority. So priority actually represents something like I told you, right? So you can even prioritize the queue items. Like for example, I want to run my queue item, a specific queue item, at a very high priority. That means I want to consider it as first to process before any other queue item added maybe before this queue item. For example, I want this queue item to be processed like in a high priority comparing with others. There you can specify this priority. You can see we have three priorities: low, normal and high. By default it is a normal, and you can provide a unique ID or reference. It is auto populated once the work queue item is created if you not provide any value. And you can also provide an expiration date. I told you, you can provide the expiration date at the work queue level as well as at the queue item level. So if you provide a work queue expiration date, then it will get expired and it won't be processed by the bot. So it is useful in the scenarios where time is a very important factor. Okay, and input, you can provide the input here, like what data you want to, maybe some information that you want to pass through your work queue item to be processed. For example, in the invoice entry, the entire row of data you can pass it in the input field. So you can pass the input data either in a plain text or in a JSON format or an XML format. It's completely free unless you select a particular schema at the work queue creation. And processing nodes is something like you can provide, maybe we use it for we use it mostly at the end of the process. Like, okay, once the queue item is processed, I want to write a processing notes like, okay, my queue item has been processed successfully with some additional details. Or if it is failed, I want to specify that this is the error by which the entry was not successful. So these kind of things you can mention in processing notes. You can also mention processing notes at the creation also, but we do recommend it. Do maybe sometimes it is important, but the instances where I have seen, like, it's I do provide the processing notes while at the end of the processing each queue item. So these things has to be this is how you can create a work queue item at the work queue item work queue portal, which we never do actually, because we normally do it through flows where it populates from some Excel sheets, because there is some source, right? Excel, database, SharePoint, Dataverse. Sometimes we need to populate the data from those sources to the work queues. So the best way is to have either we can use cloud flows or desktop flows, but in our demonstration and all we will be completely dealing with desktop flows, because work queue is completely designed for desktop flows actually, I would say, because work queue is something which is designed for, I would say, unattended scenarios, like in unattended automation, like where the load is very high, and if you want to distribute the load, there this work queue actually play a very important role. It actually helps to distribute the work queue items, helps to do kind of multi robot transactions and all. So something that's one of the benefit of having the work queues, that we will see in the advantages section when we discuss about the advantages section. So this is about work queues. So let me just show you one of the processed work queues. See, so you see here, maybe this is the input I just provided in the format of JSON, which is okay for me. And also you see this is actually populated by the bot, like, okay, this failed, so what is the reason it got failed? So something like that. So if I just show you one success scenario, see, it will say that, okay, this is actually populated by the bot, this processing notes like record created successfully in the Contoso app with record ID 1023. So this is something bot has populated at the end of like entries and all. So when I mention entry, like work queue is also, work queue feature is not you always use for entry. It is an example, I would say. So there are many scenarios where work queues can be used, like certain scenarios I would say where load is important, where there is a very high load, and I would say high load and unattended automation scenarios. So unattended automation scenario with high load. So in these cases actually work queue play a very important role, or it would be beneficial to use work queues, I would recommend. So now let's go to the work queue item status, which I was discussing before when I was discussing about this work queue item creation. So if you see here, right, each work queue has a work queue item has a specific status. So if I go to overview, I could see that there are many status associated with the work queues. If you see queued, processing, processed, on hold, expired, processing timeout, generic exception, IT exception, business exception. So why this status is actually used? Status can be used, actually it is used by the bot as well as by the user. So why with the bot is because bot can understood, okay, which item it has processed, and from the user perspective I would say it actually helps the user to understand, okay, how many queue items has been processed, how many failed. So just a I would say it gives a view, right? So but more importantly it is used by the bot, I would say, to understand, okay, to understand which queue items it actually has to process or which already has processed, I would say, from the technical perspective. So let's discuss about each queue item status one by one. So first is queued. So queued means when you add a particular work queue item to the queue, its status would be in queued status. So if I just go to items and just click on new, and I just give a name like ABC, you see the status which I have to select either would be queue or non-hold. On-hold is normally used for some reviews which we normally not take. So when we are adding a work queue item from a flow, we always select the queued state, because only the feature here is the I would say the feature here is the bot always process those queue items which are in the queued state. Okay, queued state means it is ready to process, I would say. Okay, so that is the meaning of queued state. Actually, if you have explored some other RPA platform, these names would be uh, different. For some other RPA platform it would be different, but the concept is same, I would say. Next is processing. So once a processing means once a bot has picked up a queue item, the queue item status changed to processing. So it indicate what so processing means that it is actually taken by the bot. Okay, so that is what this processing concept actually mean. So by this processing it actually is very advantageous, so that if for example on the same queue item some other bots are also processing, I told you there's a multi-robot scenario can be easily handled by work queue. So I would say multi-robot scenarios can be work queues are mostly used for multi-robot scenarios. So in that scenarios, for example, one bot picks up one queue item, its status changed to processing. Now the other bot which is using the same work queue won't take that queue item which is in processing state, because it understands that, okay, this queue item is already taken by some other bot, so it won't take it. So this processing state means when the work queue item is taken by the bot for processing, its status changed to processing. Process means once the work queue item is completed, has been completed processing. For example, uh, for example, when you have a work queue item which bot is using for some processing, okay, for example it is doing some invoice entry. So once the bot has completed the invoice entry, the bot will mark its status as processed. If it is successful, the bot will mark it as processed, saying that, okay, the bot has successfully processed this particular queue item or work queue item. Okay, and next is on hold. On hold, I told you, it is normally used for business review. For example, some work queue item got failed, that we will discuss later. So at that point we need to do some manual reviews, or business want to do some manual review, so we can mark those queue item status as on hold, so that it won't get processed by those queue items, and it will only process once business reviews it and do a final action. Next is expired. Expired status comes when the actually this expired status normally comes when the work queue item is expired. I told you, right, there is a expiration date for each work queue item, we can set it. So if we have set a work queue item expiration date, and if the date is past that particular expiration date, then it means that that work queue item got expired. So at that point its status become expired actually. And next is processing timeout. So next all these next all the status represent some kind of exception. Processing timeout means, for example, due to some issues, it takes longer time to process, you can mark the status as processing timeout. And generic exception means due to some general exception, it think something happened, so at that point we can mark the status of the queue item as generic exception. Sometimes some error happened. IT exception means so due to some network issues, something unknown exception happened. At that point you can mark the status of the work queue item as IT exception. And business exception means For example, there is some rules which has been set by business. For example, when doing some invoice entry, the invoice amount should be greater than $100. If it is less than $90, it shouldn't do the entry. At that point, if for example, if a invoice entry has an invoice amount of $80, it is violating the business rule. At that point, you can mark the work queue item status as business exception. And coming to these four error scenarios, like processing timeout, generic exception, IT exception, and business exception, only IT exception is only able to do a retry. Like for those having IT exception, we can only do a retry. For others, we can't do a retry. That's one thing you have to remember. um, and if you have explored, I told you, if you have explored this other platform, RPA platform, maybe the same work queue concept will be there as well, but the status name would be different. So sometimes it may be easier for you to follow. Just maybe if you're getting confused by the state, it's actually almost same. Everything is almost same, but term names are different actually. So another point I have to discuss. I think you have got an idea around about each status, right? So now, so for example, if I take this one, there is a change work queue item status. So every if for example, if a work queue item has a particular status, it can be there is some restriction in which we can change it to some other status as well. For example, if you click on change work queue item, see what are the allowable state transition. You see certain work queue item status may not be selectable if they don't match the allowable transition part. For a business exception, you can either change it back to queued, on hold, generic exception, IT exception, processing timeout, but you can't select it as a processing, processed, etc. Okay, so this is something you have to remember. So for example, due to some reasons your queue item got failed and you want to try it again. So at that time what you can do is you can put it back to queued and you can run your bot. So then it will process it. So this is something you have to remember. So we have discussed about the work queue items here, like about a general overview about work queue as well as work queue items as well as the queue status. Now let's go to Power Automate desktop to explore some of the actions which is associated with the work queues. So I already told you that this work queues is normally used for desktop level automations because desktop flows. Why? Because I told you like work queue is actually used in scenarios of unattended automations where the high load is actually available. So it is actually designed for desktop flows. Even though we can use cloud flows to load some data to work queues and process some work queues, but I don't think it is required for a cloud flow because cloud flow has some other features also which can imitate this work queue. But for desktop flow it is a very beneficial feature. So let's focus more on the work queues here, work queue features or work queue actions which are available in the Power Automate desktop. So let's go to a desktop flow. I have created a desktop flow here just to showcase some of the work queue actions. So under this actions panel you will see that there is a work queue and it is a premium feature, and there are many, I think there are around 7 actions for this particular work queues. So let's try to understand what each action or what does each action does. So let me first explain. Add work queue item into work queue action. So this action actually helps to add a work queue item into a specific queue. For example, the use case would be, we'll see, you have an Excel file and you have 10 rows. You want to add those 10 rows as 10 work queue items into the work queue from a desktop flow. At that point this action will be very beneficial. You can directly use these add work queue item actions and you can directly add those work queue items. And this is one feature. And now so here if I select this work queue item action, you can see some of the fields like you have to select the work queue. For example, I will select contest automation. You can select the status. I would select as queued, and you can select the priority and also name, like the name of the queue. Let's say I just give it as data, and you can provide the input. So input you can provide in the form of JSON or in the form of plain text. So for example, I'm just putting a plain text data. So in the demo we will see the actual how we are passing the JSON data, but it is not strictly to JSON. You can use XML format also. It's completely free, independent which data format you are using the input field. So this is sample queue item. I'm just describing it. And what is the expiration date? You can provide the date actually, and delay until. Like delay until is a kind of feature which actually helps to prevents this queue item from processing. For example, I don't want to process this particular queue item until 2 hours are completed. So that in that scenario what happens is, if you set a particular delay until value date time, it means that the work queue item won't be taken by the bot even though its status is in the queued state. So that's the thing you have to understand. And you can provide the processing nodes and unique ID or reference. Sorry, actually I forgot to mention this one. So unique ID or reference actually helps to make each work queue item unique. For example, I want to make sure that there is no duplicate data entry into the work queue. At that point, uh, at that point, uh, I can provide a particular value which actually helps to make this work queue item as unique. And if the same work queue item with the same ID is getting added to the work queue, it would get restricted. So that is some feature of this has unique ID or reference. You can provide, for example, in your invoice you have some ID. So this ID is unique for every invoice entry, and you don't want that this I with the same ID another invoice entry should happen. It should be like a kind of duplicated. In that scenario, you can provide that column value here as a unique ID, by which it restrict you to restrict you to restrict the prevents the duplication. Okay, for example, with the same QR same invoice with a similar ID is again tried to add to the queue, it won't allow to add. So that is something good feature I would say, because for example sometimes due to human mistakes, uh, maybe after 1 month you try to add one work queue item which is already processed in the past. This will actually prevent. So this is something a very good feature. And if you see, so this work queue item, add work queue item, will create a variable called new work queue item variable. So this work queue item variable will have many properties associated with it, which you can use it for further process. So if I just use a display message, so here if I just try to select, you will find that it has a lot of properties. Whatever properties we have tried to add, some properties which we'll also get some other properties also, something very good which you can utilize it for further part. This is just for your reference. So now let's try to add this particular queue item. Maybe I'll provide a value like data just to show you how this unique ID works. So let me just run it. Yeah, it has been added, and if you go and check your work queues, I would say just refresh it. Yeah, you see a work queue item has been created, and you will see the details like input details, what we have passed here and all. Okay, and you can even edit the queue item from here. Okay, and now let's try to see how we'll process this queue item. Processing queue item. Okay, so processing means you are taking the queue item from that work queue and do it for further processing, like doing some invoice entry and all. But now I just want to show you, like let's try to add the same queue item. Okay, let's see what happens. You see, it will throw an error because it won't allow you, because already we have enabled a feature here, unique ID or reference data. So if we disable this one, and if we maybe, you see the what the error here is, a work queue item with provided unique ID or reference already exists, because with the same value data, or because we have enabled this feature. But now if we don't enable this feature and just try to run it again, now you see that it has got added to the system or work queue. If you just refresh it, see, it has been added. So that is the feature of having that unique ID or reference. It prevents a duplicate entry if needed. Okay, so let me just edit it for some other purpose, like data 1, this is sample queue item 2. Okay, now let me start the processing. Okay, so now how we can process this queue item, what I meant here is how we can take the queue item from the work queue and will start the processing. For that, to take the queue item from the work queue, so what we can do is we can use this process work queue item. So this process work queue item actually helps to take the work queue, like each work queue item, and it is the one which converts the work queue item status into processing, so that no other bot, so that bot can understand that it is in the processing state, so no other bot should take it. Okay, so now let me just select this Wonders automation. So you can hear some advanced properties, like you can provide a fetch XML query. For example, you want specific queue items based on its some values. For example, based on its name, you want to filter it. Only those queue item you want to process. At that point, this filter rows feature can be a beneficial one. I'm not going to discuss much into it. You can just found it in the Microsoft documentation. It's actually there are a lot of examples there as well. And next is another advanced feature is override work queue auto retry configuration. I told you, like when you set the work queue, actually there is a auto retry, like how many times you can retry in the case of an IT exception. That value you can override it here. For example, you provided an auto retry value of 2, and here you provide it as 0 or let's say 1, then this value will be taken. That means this work queue item will be retried once in case it get failed due to some exceptions. So that is the advantage of having this particular feature. If you enable this one, this value will be taken. If you don't enable this one, whatever value being set in the work queue will be taken. So I'm not enabling this one. So now let me just use a display message to display the content of the work queue item. Maybe I will just use okay, I will just display the value which is present in that work queue item, the input data. Maybe also along with that, what I would like to keep here is like update the work queue item status. I will explain you in detail like what is this feature. I think you from the name itself you may have understand what it is doing, but we'll see that. So let me just but before that, let me do something easier, like okay, I will put this as under high priority, and you have to remember that normally normally this work queue item is normally taken, okay, first, then only this one, because this was added first, this was added last. But now you will see that due to this high priority, now this will be taken first, then this will be taken last. Maybe I will just run this and will explain, because if you see for each work queue item the input details are different. So let me just So let me just click on run. Now you'll see that uh, see, this is sample work queue item 2. I think this is coming from the data 2, right? Data 2 queue. So now let me just, I have put a breakpoint here. So if you go back to the work queue item, you'll understand that if you just refresh it, see, this data 1 is in the processing state. So that's advantage. Like when you use this process work queue item, it will take each queue item and it will set its status to processing. Okay, and next is update work queue item. What does this update work queue item does is, for example, after your processing of the queue item has been completed, like your data entry has been completed, now you want to set the status like process, whether it failed, like that. So in that case you can set the work queue item status here. So maybe let me just run it. Now you see status is processed, and also you see the processing nodes also. If you want to see, I think it will take some time. Maybe I have, sorry, I think I haven't put the processing nodes here. So let me just stop the flow. So let me just close it. I think it will take some time. Sometimes it will take some time to show that processing nodes and all. Okay, so let me go here. So let me just run it. Maybe it will take some time. Sometimes some refresh is required to show the processing nodes, because if you go to the Power Automate desktop, you will see that here. So this is the update work queue item. So here you are passing the work queue item variable which you are getting from here. Okay, so this actually represent each work queue item which is to be processed, and then we can set the status anything like unchanged. Unchanged means you don't want to change the status, you want to keep the status as it is, then you can use unchanged. And input, for example, you want to add some, you want to overwrite some data, at that point you can add input, and you can add some processing nodes if you need. Okay, like okay, to notify that okay, this queue item has been processed successfully, with some additional details. Also you can click on this clearing node, so that what's the advantage of this clear processing node is, for example, if there is already a processing node existing, you can remove it using this clear processing nodes feature. Okay, something very important. And let me just see, you can see the processing nodes here. Sometimes it will take some refresh to show that processing state nodes. So this is about so actually I've stopped the flow. That's the reason why you have seen that. Okay, so what you understand here is, like, the bot takes the each queue item. So here why it takes this data one, because it is having high priority. It changes this process work queue item action changes its states to what? It changes its states to processing state, then it will update the status as processed, right? Now let me just run it again. Okay, let me just use this one, or see what happens next. See, this is sample queue item, and if I just go here, refresh, see, its status is changed to processing from queue. Now let me just click here. Now you will see that its status changes to processed. Okay, and and you can even change its status to any value. If you see here, update queue item does not only change the status of work queue item to process. You can change to generic exception, IT exception, business exception, processing timeout. Okay, so you can change it anywhere. And unchanged means you don't, let's say you don't want to change the status of the work queue item, it want to remain as it is, so that you can keep it as unchanged. So this is something, a new feature has been added in the latest version of the Power Automate desktop. Okay, so this is something I just want to discuss about the update work queue item. Now I think there are some other features also, like for example, I just want to explain you about sorry, yeah, okay, so let me just explain you about some other features here. So let me just add one more work queue, or let me just change its status. Queued, and let me change the status to queued. Okay, so now let me go to here. Yeah, so there is one more feature called requeue. Requeue means you can change the processing date of a work queue item. For example, you don't want to process your work queue item today. For example, I want to process it after 2 days. Then you can set its processing date to 2 days after current date. Then what happens is, even the flow runs in between the days. For example, it runs tomorrow. It won't take that particular queue item, and it will only process after the processing date has been passed. So I will show you that also, like to give you an understanding. So let me delete this one, and let me use get let me use date. Okay, so let me just select get current date and time here. Okay, and let me add 2 days to the date and time. So let me select the date time variable, that is current date and time, add let's say 2, and let me put it as 2 days. Okay, so now what will happen here is let me just use enqueue. Sorry, I think I have to check it again. Sorry, requeue. Name sometimes I forgot the name sometimes. So I have selected this work queue item. Now delay until, so you can set the delay until. So delay until is the property. So if you hover over this one, you will see the time a queue item is held in queue until it is released for processing. So until this time it won't be used for processing here. And so what happens here is, when you use it under process work queue item, its status, it would be in processing, right? So when you use this requeue item with delay, you will change back its status to queued with the process with delay until property populated. So I will show you that, so maybe you will get to understand that one. So now let me just I'll put some processing notes. Okay, don't need to do have that. So now what we'll do here is, let me run the bot. So I think I have one work queue item, okay, two work queue items here. See, this is sample queue item 2, and if you see its status remains in its status changed to processing. Let me just click here again and see what happens. See, its status changed again back to queued, and you see delay until December 19. So now if you try to run it again, even though we have two queue items, right? Maybe I just refresh it. Even we have two queue items, but what happens here is we think that okay, we'll have two queue items, so it will process two queue item. But you will see here that when you process it, see, it doesn't did any processing there. Why? Because our queue items are in hold until 2 days. Only after 2 days we will be able to process these queue items. So this is actually the feature of requeue item with delay. It will delay a particular queue item to a specific date. So only after that date this queue item will be available for processing. So this is the feature of requeue item with delay property. And next is there are some other properties like add multiple work queue items. For example, you have an Excel table, you want to add it all the Excel data to a queue instead of doing a loop that we do using add work queue items. In that case you can use add multiple work queue item action, where you can pass the data table or something. Okay, so you can pass the data table. If you see what are the things it can accept, like data table, so you can pass the data table, it will add that data item directly as a queue. And there are some other properties like update work queue item, processing nodes, get work queue item. So here you can get a specific work queue items from the work queue, not only those which are ready to process, some maybe already processed and all. Maybe this can be used for some reporting purpose. Okay, so this is something I do want to give you an overview about work queues here. So I hope you got a better idea like how work queues actually works. So let's go to a PPT where we will be explaining the demo. Okay, so let me explain one interesting use case that I have designed for this particular webinar using work queues. Okay, so let me explain the business scenario very easily. Okay, so here there is a business user. Let's assume his name is John. He's a data entry clerk, and what his job actually is, he want to enter invoices, support cases, record details into the Contoso application on a monthly basis. Like for example, he want to enter it on every month end. He want to do an entry on the Contoso application. This is a Contoso application. In Contoso application we have a section for invoices, we have a section for support cases, we have a section for records. So what needs to enter the details into these do a data entry in these particular applications. So now he's actually manually doing this at the month end, and he is facing a big problem there, because sometimes there always the amount of data he need to enter for these three tabs will be large. For example, sometimes in terms of 100. So if he's actually it is actually consuming a lot of time, the valuable time which he can do some other productive tasks. So he is actually looking for a way to get it automated. So what he's gonna to do is he is actually going to check with the IT team to see whether he can do it automated. So now let's go to the developer, who is me itself. So I'm the developer here who is going to design the automation for John on this Contoso application. So actually I got the requirement from the John, like what the automation actually should be do, like it should enter the details into the Contoso application into invoices, support cases or records, right? Both three has to be handled, and I have to keep, and when I was thinking about this design, I have to keep three things in my mind. One thing is it should handle large number of data. Already John told that like sometimes there will be hundreds of records which is coming every month, and it takes a lot of time to be automated. And next, from the design perspective, I have to integrate three types of entries in a single flow, because you have to understand that we have three different entries. One is invoices, one is support cases, other is records. So maybe when you talk about the design thing, you need to find a single optimal design where a single flow can be used for all these three automation or all these three entries. So normally when you think from a high level perspective, you may think, okay, I should design a flow for entering invoices, I should design a flow for entering records, I should design a flow for entering support cases. But from the maintenance point of view, it is quite difficult, right? But at the same time, if you have a single flow which does all these things, it would be quite easier, right? So that is the point why I thought, okay, we should handle all these flow types of entries into a single flow. Another point is I need to run this process monthly from the schedule perspective. Now what happened is I start thinking about this, like how should I design this process. So later I thought, okay, we have a feature in Power Automate called work queues, and work queue is something which we use it for some load balancing, or it is used for a scenario where load is very high and all. So in the case of an unattended automation, so I think it's a best fit for our automation process. And I also draw a high level overview or high level design of this particular process, like you see here. If you see this design, like we have three different input sources. One is invoices, support cases, records. And what we are doing here is this is a technical design, you have to understand that. So what does it does is it is adding the data to the work queue, like it is adding invoice data, it is adding support case data, it is adding records data. And from the work queue you see that it is doing the respective entry, like creating invoice entry, creating support case entry, creating records entry. Okay, so this is what it is doing. So this is my high level overview of the design, like how should I design this particular process. So let me just go to this so let me just explain you by showing the demo. Maybe that would be easier. So maybe let me show this Condoso application. Okay, yeah, so this is a Condoso application which we'll be using for our automation purpose. And you see it has invoices section, it has cases section where we are entering the support cases, which it is having the visitors section. So what we have to do here is we have to take some data from some Excel table and we have to enter these data. So you see we have to enter date, account, contact, amount as well, and then we have to select the status, then we have to save this one. Similarly, that we have to do same thing we have to do for support case also. Okay, and same thing we have to do for records as well. Okay, and then you will think, okay, we got the idea behind this process. Then next our question is, what is the input source of this data? So normally business has decided that they will provide the data in the form of Excel file. You see they will provide three Excel file, one for invoices, one for support cases, and another for records. Okay, or support cases. Okay, so let me show you the each of the Excel file. For invoices, you see this is the input format, record input data format. You see it has the date, it has the account, contact, amount in status, same as you see in the invoice section. Okay, so what happens here is once it enters the data, there is an ID generated. So bot will capture that ID and it will save it in the work queue. Okay, so that is how we have thought of the design. It will follow the same thing for all, like it will do the entry, and there is a particular ID. That ID it will save it for further references. It will save it, currently it is saving into the work queue, but you can maybe in your actual flow you can save it to some you can save it to like Excel file, for which maybe you can send it to business for as a part of the final process section and all. It depends, but here what I'm doing here is I'm taking each work queue item, processing each work queue item, then I'm saving the details in the processing notes that you will see later. So now let me show you the input record format for the records. You see for record this is how the input format looks like. And for the support cases, this is how the support cases also look like. So these are the three input format of data that we'll be using for our automation process. So I hope you got a very clear idea like how our process is going to perform or how process is going to work. So let me just don't do any changes. Let me just close all this off. Okay, So let me go back to my slides. Okay, so now I've told you about the business process, like what I have to do and what I'm going to use, right? I'm going to use work queues. Now let me show you from the flow perspective. So here this is something not it won't be followed similar in all the organization. It depends on organization best practices and all they will follow. So normally we would have two kinds of flows when you are dealing with work queues. One flow would be there which will be adding the records to the queue. So this is known as a dispatcher flow. So what does the dispatcher flow actually does is it will take the data from all the input records and it will populate into the queue. In this case, you know, we have three different Excel files. So what it does is it will take each of the Excel file data and it will add those details to the work queue. So this is actually a high level overview of the flow design, like how the flow will be designed actually. So you can look it through for just a reference. Like you see here, the bot will list all the Excel files in the folder. If you loop through each of the file, and based on the file type, like based on the entry type, it will enter the details to the queue, as you see. This is just for your reference because we will be seeing the actual flow which is designed in the Power Automate desktop. So next type of flow, so we have discussed about dispatcher, which will add the records or which will add the details to the queue. Next type of work design is performer, which will process those work queue items. So see, this is the flow design, I would say Power Automate desktop flow design, which actually process each work queue item. So how it processes each work queue item? By creating an entry in the Contoso application. You see here, it is launching the Contoso application and then it is doing the entry. It is creating the support invoice entry, support case entry, record entry. Finally, it is updating the work queue status, and finally everything is done. It is closing the Contoso application. That's how the process is getting end. So this is just a high level design that I just want to show you, like how we have designed this flow. This is just for your reference. So let me show you the actual flow designed in the Power Automate desktop. But please remember that this is something not followed universally, because every project have their own design aspects. Like some projects, what they do is they combine these dispatcher performer model into a single flow. Okay, sometimes they do separately, but some I have seen certain areas where they design this dispatcher flow as well as this performer flow into a single Power Automate desktop flow, and based on some boolean values they will control which section needs to be run. So it is completely depend on the design aspects of an organization which it is following. So let me show you the dispatcher flow first, which actually add the details to the queue. So from where it is adding from an Excel file in this case. Okay, because we have three Excel files, but in reality it can be different. For example, invoice data can be coming from an Excel file, support cases can be coming from a SharePoint, as well as your records can be coming from a database. So at that point also you can follow the similar architecture there, like you can consolidate all your data and add it to the work queue. From there you can start the processing. So advantage, I would say, if you think from the advantage point, it actually helps to simplify the structure, right? We have discussed at the first part, like this work queue actually helps to simplify this complex automation process. What automation process which we have think of so much complex, it actually becomes simpler by using the work queue. That's something, the advantage of having the work queue actually. So let me just open this dispatcher flow. Okay, so this is the dispatcher workflow which I have designed. So you can see here that, okay, so here what the workflow is doing is it is looping through a folder which has all the three files. Then what it is doing is it is looping through each of the file, and then as you see that, okay, each Excel I'm for each file actually I'm using the sheet name. So in the sheet name I'm providing invoices, records, like that. So based on the sheet name, what it is doing is it is doing different operation. You see here, like for each Excel file it will capture all its worksheets. Then for each worksheets, what it is doing is, for example, if the worksheet has the name invoices, then it will run the subflow which will actually read the data from the invoices and it will add to the queue. So this is a subflow which will read the data from the invoices, if you see here, and it will add the details to the queue. Okay, and if you see when you are so we have the data table, right, invoice data. So for each row in the invoice data you see we are creating a random text. So this random text will be appending into the name of the queue that you will see. So in the add work queue item, see, I'm selecting the queue, the status, and you see, since I know that my queue name, this queue item, so to identify, okay, what does this queue item contains from the, when we look at the queue item, or for example, in the next bot, that is the performer process the queue item, to easy identification, what I do is, at the, in the name, I'm prefixing the type of the entry. For example, this is the invoice, so I'm just using invoice underscore the queue name. Queue name actually represents uh, QName actually represents this random text. So this is a kind of a random text which actually helps to keep, it's like kind of GUID, I would say. Okay. Yeah. See, and here if you see, I am using a JSON format where I'm from each row, what I'm doing is I'm adding the following details like action type, invoice date, invoice account, invoice contact. This is coming from your Excel file itself, Excel sheet, I would say, and I'm not adding any other details here. Okay, now similarly, if the sheet is records, what we'll be doing here is we'll be reading the data from the records. See, the same approach that we are following here. Okay, something when it comes to support cases also we are doing the similar approach. Okay. Okay, because why I've used switch case, because the data which needs to be entered from these three types are different. That is the reason I'm using different approaches here. Okay, so I hope you have got an idea like how the dispatcher flow is designed. So this dispatcher flow, what does it do is it will actually take the data from the Excel, reads the data from the Excel, and it will populate to the work queue. That's what this dispatcher flow will do. So let me just close this one and let me run the flow directly so that I can show you what it does. So it will take some time. As you can see, the status, it changed to running, so it may have started reading the data from the Excel and populating the data to the work queue. That is a contours automation that we have seen. Actually, for the demo purpose, I have used a few records, but in the actual scenario, it would be more than 100 records, because work queue is something designed for such scenarios like heavy load, unattended automation scenarios. Work queue is actually being used, I would say. But for the demo purpose, like to show the things, that's why I've shown like with 2-3 records. But in actual scenario, it may be hundreds of records you can think of in a single work queue items, which we need to process. So it takes some time. Actually, yeah, it has completed the run. Let's check the work queue. Let me just refresh. See, you can just ignore this one because okay, anyway it won't run. So you can think that, you see, it has added around each 2 records for each type. For invoice it had 2 records. For record it had, record means for record it had 2 records. For support case it had 2 records. And you see this name, right? That's a randomly generated name. And you see the input details, same, right? Whatever you see in the invoices, it convert that into JSON format. So let's now next let's let's focus on the performer workflow which process this queue item. So let me just open this one. take some time. Yeah, so this is the performer workflow. Okay, I didn't name it as performer specifically, just contest automation process. So if you see here, it does at the beginning what it does is, so I told you, right, it is the one which processes this queue item. So processing the queue item means it will take each queue item, do a respective entry in the contest application. So what does it do is, it will, if you see here at the start, at the initialization stage, it will open the contest application. So this is the subflow which does this Condoso application opening. Okay, I didn't follow any best practice for designing this, or I didn't follow any kind of I didn't use any framework here, just something I have. This is my designed flow with some custom framework, I would say. So here it will terminate any process which is running in the background, okay, before starting anything, and this will open the Condoso application. Now what it will do is, if you see, we have used processed work queue items, where if you see here, we have used an on block error. Why we have used an on block error is, so if any exception happened, we have to mark those work queue item status with what, with exception, right? So for that purpose we have used this on block error inside the process work queue item, okay, so that it won't interrupt the running. So here what happens is, we are setting some boolean variable, and then what we are doing here is this work queue item dot value. So this work queue item is the output which is coming from process work queue item. So it is converting this work queue item dot value, it's a string, JSON string. So it is converting into a custom JSON object using convert JSON to custom object. And then what will do is, from this custom object output, it will it is capturing the action type. You remember, for every entry there is an action type property also, which determines which entry we have to do. So based on this action object, we will put we have three different scenarios. One is invoice, cases, records. If it is a default scenario, we will just consider it as a business rule exception, because we don't know which type of scenario it needs to be handled. For now we are only considering invoice, cases, record, support cases and record. So for everything we have its own subflow. For invoice we have its own subflow. So maybe if I just use, yeah, so this is a subflow for creating invoice entry in the Contoso application, where it set all the variables and it enters the details here. Okay, and finally it will find out there are some error handling we have used, like to capture the ID and all. Okay, for example, if it is not able to find that entry is being saved, or it found that, okay, the entry is entered more than one, something like that. Okay, so these are the exception handling that it does. And maybe let me go to main. So once everything is done, you see we have a update work queue item status, where it will update the work queue items status based on these flag values, whether if it is a system exception or a business exception, it will update the status accordingly as success. If it is business exception, it will update the status as business exception. If it is a like unknown exception, it will update the status as IT exception. Why? Because when it updates as IT exception, it gives a chance to retry. That is the reason. So that's what it all does. Like, apart from that, it does something same thing similar. It does the invoice entry. For cases it does the support case entry. For records it does the records entry. Okay, and after everything is processed, it will close the Contoso application. So I think let me close this one. So this is about the performer flow. Okay, so let me just close this and let me run the flow from here. Would be quite easy. Okay, so there are some input values which I'm passing, like Contoso app path and work queue ID, because I'm putting that work queue as a configurable variable, so that we can specify which work queue from which we can specify from which work queue should take the data. So I'm just putting a sensitive. So I'm okay. So it should use the default values. So let me run the. So it will have around, I would say, 6 items to be processed. So let's see how it works. So see, it has opened the Conderso application. Let's see how it do the processing. I'm not sure which entry it will do the first. I think it will do the invoices, most probably. Yeah, it will do the invoice entry. If you see, it is doing the invoice entry. It's entering the details, selecting the status. Now it will click on save button so that the invoice entry will get saved. It will capture that ID. That's what it is doing now to ensure that the invoice entry has been saved successfully. Now it will create new invoice entry. It will save the data. Now it goes to support cases where it does the entries for support cases as well. There are 2 entries for support cases, I would say. It is trying to ensure that the entry has been done successfully or not. So it will do final entry for the support cases. Okay, the operation has been completed successfully. Now I'm not I have not configured in the flow to send any emails, but you can do that also in your real flow. Okay, so if I just refresh it, yeah, see, certain queue items actually got failed to some reasons. If you see here, this has been processed successfully, while this got failed due to business rule exception. If you check the error, not sure why it got failed. You see support case is not saved successfully to Contoso application due to some issues, which you can even check, like maybe as a business user you can keep it on hold so that you can investigate why it got failed. Okay, and so that after that you can make it try again. So this is something I want to show about how the work queues can be useful. So the demo which I have shown is actually very small, like, but in the real scenario it won't be like this one. We'll be using a machine group where we'll be distributing the huge work queue items to a set of machines, so that whatever machine it is free, it will take up that. So it will do a multi-robot processing, I would say, multi-robot scenario where multiple robot process same queue items. So we'll see it in the next, in the advantages, like why this why multi-robot is found to be advantage scenario actually. So but this is actually how work queues can be used. Like, maybe don't think like we are using a two or three records, but actual scenario it can be hundreds of records. So hundreds of records can be processed efficiently and quite faster also using this work queue concept. So now let's go back to our slides where we have to explain about the work queue advantages, like why we should use work queues. So let me just explain the advantages one by one. So first advantage, what's the advantage of using work queue is first that we already know, priority based processing. So we know that, like, if we set some work queue, we can set some work queue item as high priority or low priority or normal priority. So based on that, bot will process accordingly, right? Even though it has been added later, that we have seen at the during the demo purpose, like we have set some work queue item status as high priority, then it has processed actually first, even though it was added last. So that is one advantage of using work queues. We can enable priority based processing for every work queue item, I would say. Next part, centralized monitoring, that we have already seen. Like, we have a interface, right, in the work queues where we can see an overall picture, like how many work queue items has been processed, how many has been processed successfully, how many process failed due to business exceptions. So if you go here, this is what I want to mention. Like, you can do a centralized monitoring from here, like what's the average processing time, how many queue items has been processed, and even you can enable business users to review any of the queue item. Like, I want to keep this queue item on hold because I want to investigate it before I run it. So these are something an important feature, I would say, when you explain like centralized monitoring which makes actually things very simple, right? And next part is load balancing. This is one of the important term I was saying in my throughout my lecture. Like, this load balancing concept, what does it mean is, for example, in the case of this Contoso automation itself, the business user was saying that he may have to process hundreds of records for each time. So it means that maybe if it does every month, or 300 records or 400 records, it may be more than that. So at that point, this work queue items or work queue feature actually helps in load balancing. How? So I hope you know the concept of machine groups, where you can group many machines in a single group. So using these machine groups, you can distribute the load to different machines, and this distribution of load can be taken care of by this work queue itself, so that individual robots can take care of the items in the work queue, and it will process the work queue item independently. So what would be the advantage of that? Would be like, maybe there would be 100 queue items. So if a single machine is doing the work, maybe one entry takes 1 minute, assume. So there are total 300 or 600 entries, so it will take 600 minutes, which is more, right? So at the same time, if we distribute the load to 3 different machines, then the time will be taken will be 1/3. It will get reduced by 1/3, right? Because 3 machines are processing the work queue item, so it will take less time to process those work queue item. So that is one advantage of having load balancing. And something that's a very important feature of having using work queues. So work queues are mostly used in the combination of unattended automation plus machine group. That gives you a better results, I would say, in the case of high load scenarios. And next part is retry mechanism that we have seen, like work queue item has a retry mechanism. For example, we need to retry some work queue items. In that scenarios, the retry mechanism we have, like if a queue item is failed due to some issues, we can configure it to run once n number of times based on the retry we have configured. So that is one feature that work queue item provide, or what is that's the advantage of having work queues, I would say. And now last part is reduced overall processing time that I already discussed when it actually is linked with load balancing. So when the in the case of a heavy load, so sometimes you want to reduce the processing time. Having an effective load balancing reduce the amount of time, overall time, to process the all the queue items. So it's like when you distribute the load, it's like I would say in front of an ATM. Just assume the real life, in front of an ATM we have a queue, a very long queue, 100 people are standing in the queue. Each person take 1 minute, so totally it will take around 100 minutes, right, to complete the so that overall queue gets completed. But same time, if you have two ATMs and 50 people are distributed equally across two ATM, overall the ATM process completes in 50 minutes, right? It gets completed in 50 minutes if every person takes equal time. Same concept is applied in the work queues also. Like if we have a proper load balancing, we can reduce the overall processing time. I'm not talking about individual processing time, overall processing time. This comes in handy where we have a heavy load and a single machine can't do it in like single day, because maybe to process one work queue item itself, it has a long lot of steps, so normally it may take more than 2 or 3 minutes. In that scenarios, distributing the load to different machines actually helps to reduce overall processing time. Something that's one of the important advantage of having work queues, I would say. So these are the important advantages of having the work queues. So let me explain about some comparison, which just a small comparison which I want to do, because in Power Automate or in Power Platform we have SharePoint, Excel. So what feature actually this work queue give in comparison with SharePoint and Excel? I don't say this that work queues are better than SharePoint or Excel. Each has its own advantages or disadvantages, but something I just want to showcase something like a small comparison where how this work queue can be proved efficient in its own application. Because if I say in an overall term, just an overview from this particular table, work queue is designed for what? It is designed for a efficient load balancing. At the same time, SharePoint or Excel is used for data storage purpose. It can be designed, or it can be configured to have a load balancing scenario, but it is not very easy, right? We need some kind of configurations and all, but work queue everything is in handy, which makes it easier to use. But at the same time, for using SharePoint and Excel for a load balancing scenario, we have to configure it, which may takes time, and sometimes it won't be as easy as we are doing with the work queues. Something each that's what I was telling. Each of it has its own advantages. I'm not doing a comparison that work queue is better, but when you talk about with respect to its application, work queue, Power Automate work queue is better. Okay, so let me explain feature by feature. Centralized management. We have a proper centralized management to monitor queues and items, as well as the overall I would say statistics or analytics of the process, right? We have seen that in the work queue portal. But same time, for SharePoint or Excel, we require it a manual setup, which is quite difficult thing. And concurrency management means, like I told you, right, when a queue item is in processing state, no other bots, if it is a multi-robot scenario, no other bots will touch that particular queue item, because it understood that that queue item is in the processing state, so it will go and pick up another queue item. So this feature is actually built in the work queue. Okay, so it's something, the feature of atomic operations, where things happens very fast, the status will change very faster, so that no other bot will pick up the same work queue item. It prevents, right? But at the same time, for SharePoint or Excel, that feature we require to have a custom logic, which is quite difficult. But coming to error handling and retry, work queue have its own error handling retry mechanism, but when you come to SharePoint and Excel, we require certain configuration for them, right? It's quite difficult. Maybe it's time consuming, right, to develop such thing. Even already we have it in the workflow. And scalability, that's one of the important feature of work queue. Scalability, it actually helps for high volume processing, maybe load balancing, proper load balancing. This Power Automate gives you excellent scalability, but at the same time, SharePoint and Excel, it is quite difficult when you say when when the workflow is large. Maybe for a small data set it is okay, but for large data set it may be quite difficult. Ease of setup, it's easier, right, in Power Automate for a load balancing perspective, but for a SharePoint and Excel it's not actually designed for that, and it maybe take some time, right? But cost efficiency, if you talk about the cost efficiency for Power Automate, I already told at the beginning, it requires a Power Automate premium license. But for SharePoint and Excel, right, it is included with the Microsoft Office 365. So maybe comparing with the cost, SharePoint and Excel uh, may have a higher value there. But same time for the but if you compare all the features, Power Automate WorkQ actually has a better feature. Maybe I'm talking only with respect to the load balancing. From the load balancing or the feature what the WorkQ item has to do, WorkQ actually has to do, that is the load balancing or the processing. That seems to be fine better when comparing with SharePoint Excel, because SharePoint Excel are specifically designed for data storage, right? For this handling and all, it takes some custom setup which itself is complex. Okay, and from the complex workflow support for Power Automate WorkQs, it is actually idea for complex workflows. Why? For SharePoint and Excel it is quite not suitable, right, for complex workflows. And accessibility is, I told you, right, we require that licenses and all for premium license and all for Power Automate work for SharePoint and thing, it's included with everything, right? So this is something I just do want to compare. It's not a comparison that Power Automate WorkQ is better, but just from the application perspective, Power Automate WorkQ does a better job compared with SharePoint Excel, whose job is mainly to store the data. Maybe I would say data storage facility. And I won't compare the dataverse here. The reason is because Power Automate WorkQs itself is originated from the dataverse, which I will be explaining in the next section. So let me at last let me explain about WorkQ's backend. Backend means what is the backend? What controls the design of these WorkQs? So actually, in this WorkQ is completely designed of two tables. One is WorkQ, another is WorkQ item. So these are two dataverse tables, I would say. And these dataverse tables, what does each work table will do? This WorkQ dataverse table stores the details of each WorkQ, while WorkQ and also this WorkQ, whenever you are creating a WorkQ in a specific environment in this WorkQ portal, automatically a row is added in the WorkQ dataverse table. And the advantages of this WorkQ is like there are some queue related settings which you can't do it in the WorkQ's portal. You can do it through the dataverse as well. I have written a separate blog for the same, which I will show you later so that you can refer it if needed. So it's very interesting. If you are interested, you can feel free to go through that particular blog. So let me explain about WorkQ items. So WorkQ items, what does it do is it will store the each WorkQ items which is created in the WorkQ. So a single dataverse table, that is WorkQ item dataverse table, store all the WorkQ items in a specific environment. Okay, but the thing you have to remember here is for every WorkQ item there is a column which is called WorkQ ID, which actually helps to map from which WorkQ this WorkQ item is actually. So that is the mapping point, like of for each WorkQ item in the WorkQ item table. So that for every WorkQ item there is a WorkQ ID. That WorkQ ID is the ID of the WorkQ in which it is actually stored. So that is how this WorkQ and WorkQ item dataverse tables are related. So let me just show you a glimpse of this dataverse table in the portal. So let me go here. So this is the WorkQ table, and you can see here so this is a WorkQ table. This is actually not editable through UI, but you can do it through Power Automate as well. And you can see here it has some properties or attributes like name, which represent the name of the Q item. Description means, sorry, Q, I would say not WorkQ item, it is WorkQ. See batch processor. If you go here, you can see a lot of queue, right, WorkQs. So these each WorkQ details is stored in this particular WorkQ dataverse table. You see batch process, condos automation, like this, and its corresponding details and all. And I told you, right, there are some additional settings that you can find it under this particular dataverse table for each WorkQ, but you can't find it in the work queues portal in Power Automate. So there is something I have written already a blog. I will share it soon. So this is something I just want to like show you how the work queues backends looks like. So back work queue is something designed completely based on the dataverse, I would say. So it has a two tables, one for storing the work queue details, other table for storing the work queue item detail. So let me go to the next table which stores the work queue items. So this is the table, dataverse table, which stores the work queue item details. Its name is work queue item. You see the work queue item which we have previously created, case 313 and all, and you see each work queue item is connected to the work queue. If you see, go here, see work queue ID. So actually this is a kind of lookup table from this particular dataverse table, so that it actually helps to map each work queue item corresponding to its work queue. So this is what I just want to show you, like, or the backend of the work queues. Also let me show you the blog which I have written for uh, this like I told you, right, there are some settings in the work queue dataverse table that you can configure for the work queue which is not available in the work queues Power Automate portal. So this is the blog. You can go through this particular blog. This is same blog which I have shared at the beginning of the slide. So you can go through this particular blog and you will find this topic here. So in this topic I have explained like how we can change those configurations. Like there's some important attributes which can be returned, so we are using some Power Automate flows to change those values, which actually helps to change those settings for that particular work queue. So feel free to go through this particular blog. So let me know your uh, valuable feedback over this particular blog by through your comments and likes. So let me go back to the slides again. So this is all about, I want to discuss about the work queues, and I hope you were able to grasp some important concepts behind the work queues, like what is work queues and how work queues actually work, and in what scenarios we have to use the work queues and all, and also the backend part of the work queues. So now it's time for the questions. Feel free to ask me any questions which you have around this particular topic, or your feedback, even if it is positive or negative. Let me know.
Um, Thank you, Nived. A very insightful session from you. In fact, a training as well. I see a few questions which we might want to take up. So the first question that I see is it possible to use the same work queues as a part of different processes? Is it even possible?
Yes. So if you mean like a kind of a concept where we have different set of process and all these set of process are using the same work queue, it is actually possible. Like maybe like it's a case of, let's say, one work queue item is used in the first process, and there is some information we are getting from the first process, and we want to update it into the same work queue item. For that like we need to do some configuration in the dataverse as well. Maybe I can show you that also. Let me share my screen.
Hmm. Perfect. Go ahead,
Yeah,
share your screen. It becomes
yeah,
much simpler.
yeah. So what happens there is normally when you try to update a work queue item in the Power Automate desktop, maybe just give a minute, let me just open the Power Automate desktop also. uh, um, I think it's opening up. Let me just share my screen again. So normally what happens here is, so when you try to update a work queue item using the Power Automate desktop action, that is update work queue item, by default when you try to update the input details, like input details in the sense means like we have in the work queue, we have the input details where we are entering the information that we need to process. So you can't do by default, you can't update the input details of a processing work queue items by default. And for doing that, for if I just go here under work queues, I think update work queue, sorry, I think this is not the actions. This is the action. Okay, update work queue item. So normally when you try to select a maybe I don't want to change, I want to change the it's a kind of a, yeah. So like say I don't want to change the status, At the same time, but I want to make sure that the input should be updated. The not by default, we can't update the input details of a processing work queue item. For doing that, what you have to do is first you have to do a small configuration within the dataverse of the work queue. So if I go to this work queue, you see that there is one property called allow update item input while in processing. So by default, maybe I can show you clear filter. By default, if you create a work queue item, for example, for our automation scenario, like for our demo purpose, we have used Contoso automation work queue. If you see, by default, its value is being set as not set. It means that we don't have the permission to update the uh, input details of the processing work queue item. Okay, so for making it to update, like for making that work queue to enable to update the work queue item while processing, what you have to do is this is a drop down kind of option. You can't edit it from the Dataverse UI. You have to use Power Automate cloud flow for that, where you develop a flow which find this particular record, and then it will update this particular attribute for this particular record. So what you have to do is you have to there are few values which I can show you. So for example, there are three values: not set, no, and yes. By default, not set is the option. You have to set it as yes. So if you set it as yes, then it will allow by using when the work queue item is in processing state, you can update the input details as well. So that's the thing you have to that's the thing by which you can make sure that one work queue item which is used in one process, you can directly use in another process also using this option. But like in the case when you have to update the input details as well.
Got it.
So yeah. Hmm.
Thank you for that. I
Hmm.
hope that Nived was able to answer your question.
Maybe I think also I have explained that same thing in my blog also. If you do
Mhm.
like to have go through it, maybe I've shown it earlier too. Maybe I have explained the step by step, like there are certain attributes you have to change. Apart from the attribute which I have shown you, there are some other interesting attributes that you can't configure through workqueues UI actually. You have to do it through the Dataverse. But for doing through Dataverse, you can't do it through the UI of the like UI of the Dataverse that we have seen. You can't edit it. You have to go through the Power Automate workflow like this, which I have designed. Like you have to list that record, and then you have to update that particular record to update the particular settings if you see here. So you can just go through this particular block if you need. Yeah. Uh,
Perfect. And we'll
yeah.
share your blog even in the description section
Yeah.
so they can go ahead and look at it. I
Hmm.
had an interesting question that came up.
Hmm.
What about security in WorkQ? Like, is it secure? You're sending your data maybe over the internet, right? If you're
Hmm.
scraping it, is there a way to have it better secured?
Well, security we can implement itself through the Power Automate flows, like Power Automate flows itself, like using the cryptography actions. I would say, like we can encrypt the data. There should be some confidential data that we don't want others to see, so we can encrypt it using this cryptographic actions. And then when you are processing those work, maybe for example, as you say the case of scrapping, we are scrapping the data, we are uploading the data to the work queue. So before uploading the data to work queue, we can just encrypt it using some cryptographic actions. And then when you are processing it, you can decrypt. When you are retrieving the data, you decrypt that data, and then you start processing it. That's a way you can do the security, I would say.
Perfect, perfect.
Mm,
Perhaps
mm,
a blog topic for you as well, Nived. Maybe it's an interesting question. If you have a blog on that, do share
sure.
it in the video description or just add a
Mm,
comment for it. But this was
yeah.
an interesting question that came up.
Mm,
A final $1 million question that has
mm,
come up, which
mm.
always comes up. What are the limitations of the work queue? Do you know any known limitations of the work queue?
I would say if you ask me about the limitations, there are some limitations which actually has been, I would say, noted down in the Microsoft site itself. If you know, right, when a product is released, there is some limitations that has been noted down. Maybe I can go through that if needed.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe you
sure.
can
Yeah,
share your screen and just show the
yeah.
known limitations.
Hmm. Maybe I think I have to go through that website. Just give me a minute. I think I should. Yeah.
Yeah, while
Mm,
Nived is opening that,
mm,
anyone who has got special request on a topic for Nived, especially related to the RPA, right? Do drop us a line. we like to work on the feedback given by our audience. So if you have questions, if you're struggling with something, then Nived can go ahead and come again to our platform and he can explain things about RPA. So please feel free to do that. Nived,
Yeah.
over to you. Yeah, I see the
Yeah.
limitation screen.
So these are the limitations which actually if you see the work use page where the Microsoft documentation under that you can see the non-limitation that has been explained by the Microsoft itself. You see the dequeuing currency like how much time that thing have to be dequeued and all, and the data verse limit they are explaining some of the data verse limit. If you see like since you know work queue itself is based on the dataverse technology, its backend is completely dataverse, so the API limitations and all will get applied the. And if you see work queue connectivity disabled in the GCC and high DoD environment and all, so and throughput and scaling, if you see it's not suited for high throughput scenarios where hundred or thousands of items need to be processed in seconds and all. So the I think it's easier because the limitations is easily explained within the Microsoft documentation. So I would suggest to go through this one. Maybe I can share the link also. Uh, this one.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think that's it. Those were the
Mm,
questions that came up. Thank you
mm,
again, Nived, for joining us.
mm,
We will see you again in the new year
mm.
in one of the sessions. I'll make
Yeah.
sure that I invite you. Thank
Mm,
you again. Have a great day.
yeah.
Happy New
Thank you.
Year in everyone's every
Yeah.
Happy New Year everyone in advance. Bye bye.
Bye.